Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. This review covers the Z28 Camaro Highway Patrol Car. It's a 1/20th scale kit from Lindberg, number 72577. It was released in 1993, so it's a vintage kit, but they can still be found online at auctions and even some retailers. It's a skill level 2 kit for the intermediate builder, and there were a few versions of this kit out on the market released by Lindberg, including a convertible version in '96, but this vintage kit can still be had and is pretty easy to assemble. There's 107 pieces molded in white, chrome, clear red, soft black tires, and water slide decals. And it's got some great instructions. And when you're done, this 1/20th scale kit is about 9 3/4 long, 4 inches wide, and 3 inches high. Here is the layout of the kit, and as you can see, everything's in pretty good shape, and the bags cover up and protect most of the items from each other. Separately bagged are the glass pieces, and this is my version of the open box review, and the difference between me and other reviewers is you can see everything all at once, and so that'll only take you about 5 seconds. Now we're going to be using Model Masters liquid cement, sometimes super glue for strength, and white glue or clear glue for the windows. But remember to use your manufacturer safety and use guidelines for any of the products you see or hear used in the review. And the decals, as you can see, are very colorful. I do suggest using some settling solutions available in the aftermarket to make sure they conform to contours and stick well. Construction for the kit starts with the engine, and we'll take these parts out of the box and assemble the two halves of the engine together, and then the intake manifold and oil pan are attached to the top and bottom, and the engine assembly gets painted aluminum. Now the starter is semi-gloss black and detailed with a little aluminum before it gets attached to the right side of the oil pan, and the fuel injection unit can be added now to the intake manifold. The oil filter then is painted orange. Now we can locate the heads and covers and the front plate there, and the front cover and the cylinder heads and the valve covers, they're all painted aluminum. The valve covers could be detailed with a little semi-gloss black, and the cylinder heads are attached to the engine. Now the valve covers can be attached to the cylinder heads. With these parts we can finish up the engine assembly, and the right and left manifolds are then painted aluminum, and the radiator hoses and the fan belt can be painted flat black and detailed with some aluminum for pulleys, etc. Now the right and left manifolds for the exhaust are attached to the cylinder heads, and the lower radiator hose and the upper then can be attached to the front cover in approximate position for attachment to the radiator. Now, as a reminder, you always have to scrape off any chrome or paint so that your glue will stick well and adhere to the parts. Gather up these parts to work on the interior now, and the shift lever gets painted semi-gloss black and detailed with some silver for the handle, and the interior gets detailed with some flat black, and the shift lever can be attached to the console, and then the assembly to the interior. Now the left and right inner door panels and the rear seat can be attached to the interior as well. As you probably noticed from the decal sheet, there are decals to make this strictly a stock Camaro and also make it a police version or a law enforcement. We elected to build the law enforcement version, and so we're going to start making some choices to add additional equipment to the vehicle for police version. So we're going to take these pieces, and then the rear half of the seat is attached to the front halves for both seats, and then the front seat assemblies, the dashboard, steering column, and the steering wheel are painted semi-gloss black. The radar gun and the radio is painted a gloss black, and the dashboard is detailed with some flat black and then decaled with the cluster decal. The steering column can be attached to the steering to the dashboard, and then the wheel is attached to that. And the dashboard assembly can be installed into the interior into the slots provided. The front seat assemblies then can be installed into the floor. Now the radar gun is attached to the radio, and then that whole assembly attached to the dashboard assembly. Next, we're going to add the engine to the chassis, and I might caution you here that later on I found out that the chassis has a slight warp that's not real visible, so check it very closely and make sure that it's very flat before you go on. You can straighten that out under some warm water and then set it with cold water. Now the chassis gets sprayed gloss black, and the engine assembly can be installed on the mounts into that. Now get these pieces out of the kit for the front suspension, and the right and left spindle and the lower A-arm assembly, they get painted gloss black, and the front sway bar and the tie rod are painted graphite metallic. The tie rod is then detailed with some flat black, and the left and right spindles can be installed onto the chassis, but don't use any glue there if you want the spindles to be operational. Now the front sway bar can be attached to the lower A-arm assembly. Now you'll notice in the finished picture here the tie rod's not installed on the spindle yet for clarification, and the lower A-arm then assembly can be attached to the chassis assembly, locking the spindles into place, but don't glue them onto the spindles again if you want those operational. The tie rod is attached to a post on both spindles, and then you need to take something like the head of a nail and warm it up with a candle or something, and flatten the posts on the spindles to lock the tie rod into place. Now we'll work on the exhaust with these pieces, and the right exhaust pipe and the extension and the muffler get painted Testors aluminum, and the exhaust pipe extension can be attached to the left exhaust manifold, and the right exhaust pipe is attached to the exhaust pipe extension and the right exhaust manifold. Now the muffler assembly can be attached to the chassis assembly and the exhaust pipe extension, and both tailpipe extensions then are attached to the muffler. We can finish up the driveline construction with these pieces for the rear, and the rear axle upper half is then attached to the lower, and both rear springs and the rear axle assembly are painted gloss black. Now the rear shock absorbers can be painted your favorite color. I used red and silver, and then the drive shaft is painted steel. The rear springs now can be attached to the rear axle assembly. Then the drive shaft is attached to the transmission on the engine assembly simultaneously, and the rear axle assembly can be attached to the chassis assembly and the drive shaft. Now the rear shock absorbers are attached to the rear axle assembly and the chassis. Finally, the rear suspension support and the front cross member and rear are painted gloss black, and then the rear anti-sway bar is painted gloss red. The rear suspension support can be attached to the rear axle assembly and the chassis, and then the front cross member and the rear cross member are attached to the chassis too. Now the rear anti-sway bar can be installed to the rear axle assembly and the chassis. Next we can begin work on the body assembly, and we're going to attach the front rear fascias, bumpers, etc. there to the body with some super glue, some light super glue, and then once you've done that, check the body for flatness, for squareness. Make sure that it doesn't have a warp in it. Same thing, run it under some warm water to let it set, and then run cold water on it to keep it there. We're going to take the body and prep it by cleaning up any of the mold lines or small amount of flash around the wheel wells, etc. And once that's done, give it a light overall sanding and spray it with some light gray primer. Now this was then masked off and sprayed so that the gloss black covered most of the body section except for the roof and the trunk area there. Now the following decals for your officer's vehicle can be attached to the body at this time, and once those decals have dried overnight, then go ahead and spray this with some clear gloss coat to seal them in and Make sure that you've got a good surface, dry surface after that dries to be able to handle the body for the rest of assembly. We'll use these parts for the engine bay, and the rear and front radiator halves get assembled to each other with some glue, and then they're painted gloss black and detailed with some flat black for radiator sections, etc. Now the firewall gets painted gloss black, and then both the radiator and firewall can be installed into the body. Locate the tail light bezels and lenses, and go ahead and put the right tail light lens into the bezel with some clear part cement, and then also the left side, and then both are installed into the appropriate sides of the body assembly at this time. Now we can install the interior into the body, and you're going to locate the points where the body and the interior bucket mate, and then you're going to make sure you scrape off any glue in those sections, and then use some good strong glue to adhere that interior bucket to the body shell. Now we'll work on these miscellaneous parts. The battery gets painted semi-gloss black, and you can detail the caps if you like. Then the left and right mirror housings are painted gloss black, and the brake fluid reservoir gets painted steel. The battery is installed into the body assembly on the shelf, and the fluid reservoir for the brakes is attached to the firewall too. Now the left side view mirror and the right left one housing are then attached to the body, and then assemble the right view mirror, rear view mirror, and then attach that to the body on that side. The windshield wipers are painted gloss black and detailed with some flat black for the blade, and the windshield gets installed into the body with some clear part cement or some white glue, and both the windshield wipers then are attached to the body assembly in front. Using these pieces, we'll turn our attention to the back end, and the rear spoiler gets painted a medium gray, and then also some gloss white. And the third tail light there, the eye stop, is attached to the rear spoiler, and the rear spoiler then is attached to the body assembly. Now the rear window can be installed in the inside with with some Tester's clear part cement or some white glue. Just as before, we're going to look for the places where the chassis will mate to the interior pan and the body, and we're going to scrape off any paint that is there, and then apply some good strong glue to attach those together. So go ahead and put the chassis into the body at this time. Now we'll work with the headlights and bezels and the rear rotor assembly there. And we're going to paint one each of the headlight lenses. One of them will be a transparent blue, and the other one will be a transparent red. And we're going to assemble those after they've dried, with the red one going on the driver's side on the inside of the vehicle towards the center, and then the blue one will be installed into the bezel on the passenger side towards the center of the hood there in that bezel section, and then the clear lenses will be added to the bezels. Once again, you use some clear glue or some white glue for that. Now the rotors are painted silver, and they're attached to the axles in the back. Working with these parts for the hood, the hinges they get attached to the hood with some good strong glue, and then the hood assembly gets painted with some medium gray primer. Once that's dried, you'll finish that off with some gloss white and let that dry. Next, the pieces for the light bar will be used, and the base is painted with some gloss black and detailed with some silver. And then both light assemblies are attached to the light bar base. Now the light covers can be attached to the base and with some Tester's clear glue or some white glue. Now we'll take the outside air duct and paint that gloss black. And once that's dry, we'll attach it to the fuel injection unit and the left fender well. Now the wheel retainer locks the wheel's inners into place, so I put the inner portion of the wheel onto the spindles and then without glue, and then attach the wheel retainers to the inside of the wheels. So working with the wheels and tires now, install the outer wheels into the tires, and then the inners are installed on the other side of the tire, and then they get glued to the outer wheel. Now repeat that for the other 3 tire assemblies. Finally, we can attach the tires and wheel assemblies to the chassis and rotors and spindles. Attach the light bar to the top of the roof with some light glue, and then just snap the hood into place. And inspect that for warpage. Make sure that it fits flush. As I found out later, it was a little bit warped, and those are really the only issues that I found with the assembly of this kit. There are also some nice decals for the engine bay, which you see here can be installed in place at this time for a nice finished look there. Additionally, there's a couple of decals that go on the wheel hubs, and you can see those, well, you can see one of them here, the one on the end, and those add a nice touch to the overall appearance as well. Well, there you have it. This great looking kit in 1/20th scale is a nice canvas for proper display, and you get a choice of 2 different emergency vehicle decal sets to apply, and it's really a pretty good build. Everything goes together pretty well. The only issues that you'll run into are some warpage. I'm thinking maybe because these are older kits, they've probably been around, and maybe also just because they're very large pieces, some of them. So check everything for flatness and make sure that it fits well. Other than that, you should have no issues putting this kit together. It's got a great rake, and it makes an outstanding visual on your shelf. So if I were you, I'd buy one and put it there on my shelf. Well, we hope you like this premium step-by-step model kit review, and so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find us on Facebook and at our website, rightonreplicas.com. Thanks!